My father stole my college fund to pay off his mistress. Years later, I inherited his house. Now he pays me $2,500 rent every month, and that money goes straight to the women he betrayed. I'm 33 years old. I work in financial consulting, and I need to get this story off my chest because basically my father is the most manipulative and lying person I've ever known. And after years of putting up with his shit, I finally got him to pay for everything he did to us. I guess I should start at the beginning, when my parents got divorced, because that's when this whole mess really started. I was 10 years old when my parents separated, and honestly, it wasn't a surprise to anyone. Their marriage was a total disaster. You know, one of those where the parents are fighting all the time and you as a kid are just there in the middle trying to survive. The worst part is that my father, Brian, used me as a messenger between them. Like, mom says this, dad says that. And there I was, in the middle, feeling like if I didn't deliver the messages correctly, everything was going to explode. It was exhausting. I mean, I was literally 10 years old and already felt responsible for keeping the peace in a house where there was no peace possible. When they finally divorced, I remember feeling relieved, but also scared because I didn't know what was going to happen to us. My mom, Donna, kept me most of the time. She worked incredibly hard, sometimes did double shifts to support us, and never really complained. My father, on the other hand, disappeared for like 3 years. It's not that he moved far away or anything. He just wasn't present, you know what I mean? He'd call occasionally, promise he'd come visit me on weekends, and then wouldn't show up. I'd spend time waiting for him by the window like an idiot. And my mom would look at me with that pitying face that broke my heart. Eventually, I stopped waiting for him, and when he finally bothered to show up more often, I'd already learned not to trust his promises. Things changed when I was about 15, and Brian got remarried. His new wife's name was Christine, and honestly, she was incredibly kind to me. Nothing like the typical stepmothers in movies, you know? She really tried to connect with me, asked me how I was doing, was interested in my school stuff. She brought her daughter Brooke into the family, who was about 7 at the time, and she was a super sweet kid. I got used to having them in my life when I visited my father, and honestly, Christine made those visits less awkward than they would have been with just Brian. Years went by, and when I turned 18, I had to make decisions about college. I wanted to study finance, ironic, I know, considering what came later, and I'd applied to several good universities. My mom had always told me that she and my father had been saving for my education since I was little, that there was a specific fund for that. When it came time to talk about money, I sat down with both of them, and my father dropped the bomb. He wasn't going to pay a single cent for my college. He said he'd use that money for family expenses, and that I'd have to manage on my own with student loans or scholarships. I froze. I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him what the hell kind of family expenses had cost his son's entire college fund, and he got super defensive, saying he had a new family to support, that Christine and Brooke also needed things, basically justifying that he'd chosen them over me. My mom was furious, but there was nothing she could do legally, because apparently my father had handled that money in a way that was technically legal, even though it was morally shitty. So I had to take out student loans for everything, and while I was studying, I also worked part-time, doing whatever I could. I'd see other students whose parents paid for everything, who didn't have to worry about anything but studying, and I felt a rage you can't imagine. And the worst part is that my father acted like he hadn't done anything wrong, like I was the dramatic one for being upset. Minimal contact with my father. Saw him at Christmas and Maya's birthdays, my half-sister who was born when I was about 20, but nothing more. Christine always treated me well, and Brooke had become a great girl. We were closer now because the age difference didn't matter as much anymore. Maya was adorable too, a super energetic and affectionate kid. Then when I was 25, my father called me. Right there, I should have known, because he never called me unless he needed something. He asked me how I was, pretended interest in my life for a few minutes, and then got to the point. Turns out Brooke was about to enter college and they needed money. He told me this whole story about how Maya had had a medical emergency when she was younger. Something with her heart, which was true. I remembered it had happened. And that they'd had to use Brooke's college fund to pay the medical bills because insurance didn't cover everything. Now Brooke was 17 and about to graduate high school, and they had no money for her education. The way he presented it to me was super manipulative. Like, you know what it feels like to have your father not pay for your college. You wouldn't want Brooke to go through the same thing, right? And there I was, sitting thinking, this guy has the balls to use his own negligence with me as an argument for me to pay for his mistakes again. But the thing is, I loved Brooke. She wasn't to blame for any of this. And the idea of her having to go through what I went through broke my heart. I told him I'd think about it, and after a few days I answered that, yes, I'd lend him the money, but with one condition. He had to be completely honest with Christine about what he'd done. He had to tell her that he'd used her daughter's college fund for Maya's medical bills without consulting her, and that now he was borrowing money from his stepson to make up for it. Because I was sure, completely sure, that Christine knew nothing about this. Brian tried to negotiate. Say, it wasn't necessary to worry Christine, that it would only cause problems, but I stood firm. It was that or nothing. Eventually he agreed, and according to him, he had that conversation with Christine. I don't know what he told her exactly, but apparently she was okay with the arrangement. I transferred the money directly to Brooks University, not to my father's account, because I'd already learned not to trust him, and she was able to start her studies. I felt good helping her, but I also felt this constant resentment toward my father for putting me in that situation. Things went on like that for a while. I lived my life, worked, hung out with friends, and tried not to think too much about all the family drama. Then at 27, I met Layla. She's Afghan, came with her family when she was a kid, and she was the most amazing woman I'd ever met. Smart, funny, ambitious, and she understood me in a way no one else had. We became boyfriend and girlfriend after dating for 6 months, and after 2 years, we decided to get engaged. When I told my family about the engagement, my mom was thrilled. My maternal grandparents, too, everyone happy. But when I told my father, his reaction was, well, it was shit. First, he asked where Layla was from, and when I told him she was Afghan, he made this face like he'd smelled something rotten. He started with subtle comments at first, like, are you sure about this? Don't you think it would be easier with someone from your own culture? That kind of thing. When he invited us to dinner to get to know her better, he was super awkward and cold with her all night. Christine was mortified. You could see she was embarrassed by her husband, but Brian didn't control himself. The worst was at Maya's birthday, where extended family was present. My father made a comment out loud about how he was worried about the cultural differences between Layla and me, and how he hoped I knew what I was getting into. Layla kept her composure, but I saw her eyes fill with tears, and in that moment something inside me broke. I stood up, told my father exactly what I thought of his shitty racism, and we left. Christine called me later apologizing, saying she'd talked to Brian, but I was already fed up. We went ahead with the wedding plans anyway, because we weren't going to let him ruin that for us. My mom was incredible with everything, helped with the planning. My paternal grandfather, Gerald, Brian's dad, was also super excited and offered us financial help. We accepted some money from him for the reception, but we were paying for most of it ourselves. However, there were some things where we were coming up a bit short, and I thought, well, maybe it's time for my father to finally do something for me. I called him and asked him to return the money I'd lent him for Brooks College. Not all of it, just a portion to help with the wedding expenses. He'd been paying me back in super small installments for years, and he still owed me like 60% of the total. I explained that I needed that money, that it would be fair for him to contribute something to my wedding, considering everything. His response was incredible, like, really incredible. He told me he wasn't going to give me a single cent because he didn't approve of my marriage, and that if I insisted on making that mistake, I'd have to do it without his financial help. That's when I ran out of patience. Completely. I don't know what I expected, honestly, after years of disappointments, but that was the last straw. I decided that if he was going to be like that, then I was going to play dirty too. I spent a week gathering all the information I had, records of the transfers I'd made to him, emails where he admitted he'd used my college fund, conversations where he promised to pay me back and then didn't, everything. I put together a detailed document of his entire history of lies and financial manipulation. Then I sent that document in a long message to all the relevant family. My mom, Christine, Brooke, my paternal grandparents, Gerald and Joyce, some uncles. In the message, I explained everything, from using my college money for his new family, to how he had to borrow from me for Brooke after using her fund for Maya's bills, to his refusal to return my money for being racist against my fiancée. I didn't leave anything out. Like, it was the complete exposure of all his shit. The response was chaotic. My mom called me and said that while she understood my rage, maybe it had been too drastic. But then she told me she was proud that I was finally standing up for myself, so it was a mixed message. Brooke sent me a super emotional message apologizing, saying she hadn't known I'd lent that money, that her dad had told her it was a gift from the family. Christine didn't respond immediately, and that worried me a bit because she'd always been kind to me. But the response that changed everything came from my grandfather, Gerald. He called me the next day and asked if I could come see him. I went thinking he was going to scold me for causing family drama, but when I got to his house, he and my grandmother Joyce were there, and they had these serious but also kind of satisfied faces. I don't know how to explain it. Gerald made me sit down and told me, "I need to tell you something that's going to piss you off even more, but it's also going to give you ammunition." Turns out the story about Maya's medical bills was a lie. Well, not completely a lie. Maya did have a medical emergency, but Gerald had paid all the bills. All of them. My father never had to touch a single cent of Brooke's fund because his own father had taken care of everything. Gerald showed me the receipts, the payment records, everything. Brian had lied about using Brooke's money for Maya. He'd probably spent it on something else. Who knows what? And then he'd manipulated me into paying for Brooke's college using a false story. I sat there processing this, feeling the rage rise through my entire body. Gerald told me he'd suspected something like this for years, that Brian had always been a liar and manipulator since he was young, but that he'd never had concrete evidence until now. Then he told me something I didn't expect at all. He told me that the house where my father lived, where he lived with Christine and Maya, was technically Gerald's property. He'd lent it to Brian years ago, with the promise that someday he'd officially transfer it to him, but he'd never done the paperwork because he didn't trust that Brian deserved it. Then Gerald looked me directly in the eyes and told me, "That house is now yours. I'm going to transfer it to your name as a wedding gift, and also as punishment for your father for being shit to you your whole life." I was in shock. I literally didn't know what to say. My grandmother Joyce was there smiling, saying it was the right thing to do, that I deserved something good after everything I'd put up with. Gerald had already talked to his lawyer and had all the papers ready. He just needed my signature. I signed those papers so fast I almost broke the pen. The property transfer was going to take a few weeks, but Gerald assured me it was irreversible once initiated. I left his house feeling a mixture of vindication, joy, and still a lot of rage, but now it was a more productive rage, let's say. My father started calling me like crazy when he found out. Gerald had personally informed him of his decision, basically telling him he'd earned this for being a shitty father. Brian sent me like 30 emails in 2 days, some begging, others trying to make me feel guilty, some even threatening legal consequences that we both knew didn't exist. I blocked his number, put his emails in spam, and focused on enjoying the chaos I'd created. Christine finally called me, and I expected her to be furious with me, but her voice sounded tired, more than anything. She told me we needed to talk, but not now, to wait until after my wedding. She wished me happiness with Layla and hung up. It was weird, but also a relief, because at least she wasn't blaming me for everything. The wedding was beautiful. My mom cried. Gerald and Joyce were there super proud. Brooke came too, without her dad, obviously, and all our friends celebrated with us. My father wasn't invited. And honestly, I didn't miss him for a second. Layla was radiant, and for the first time in years, I felt completely happy without that shadow of family resentment over me. We went on our honeymoon to Greece for 2 weeks, and I blocked all contact with anything related to my father during that time. When we came back, I had like 50 messages from Christine. I read them all in one afternoon, and they basically told a story that left me speechless. After Gerald announced the house transfer, Christine had confronted Brian about Brooke's money. He'd insisted on the story about Maya's medical bills, but Christine wasn't stupid. She'd started investigating on her own. She reviewed old bank accounts, talked to Gerald, put the pieces together. What she discovered was worse than anyone could have imagined. Brian had had an affair years back, when Maya was about 3. The woman he had the affair with started blackmailing him, threatening to tell Christine everything if he didn't pay her money. Brian, being the cowardly idiot he is, had used Brooke's college fund to pay off his mistress and keep her quiet. It hadn't been for medical bills. It hadn't been for legitimate family expenses. It had been to cover up his infidelity. Christine told me all this in a coffee shop, crying but also with this determination in her eyes. She told me she'd already talked to a divorce lawyer, that she was going to move with the girls to an apartment, and that she'd told Brian to go fuck himself. I felt terrible for her, but there was also this small part of me thinking, finally someone else sees what I've seen for years. I offered Christine financial help if she needed it. And she thanked me, but told me she had her own savings and a good job, that she'd be okay. What she did ask me was to consider letting Brian keep living in the house temporarily until the divorce was finalized, just because she didn't want Maya to have to see her dad literally on the street. I told her I'd think about it, but honestly my first reaction was no, fuck him. Let him sleep in his car for all I cared. I talked to Layla about all this, and she, being much more mature and compassionate than me, suggested we could let him stay, but charge him rent. Not as a favor, but as a cold business transaction. He'd live there, pay market rent, and we'd split that money between my mom and Christine, the 2 women he'd hurt the most. It was a form of poetic justice, and I immediately liked the idea. I sent my father an email with the terms, he could stay in the house, but he'd pay me $2,500 monthly rent, which was what a similar place cost in that area, with a signed contract and everything. If he was late 1 month, I'd legally evict him. There was no negotiation. Those were the terms or nothing. He accepted because he basically had no choice. Moving would have cost him more between deposit, moving expenses, and everything else. So now, basically, my father pays me rent to live in what he used to consider his house, and that money goes directly to compensate a little bit for all the damage he caused. My mom uses her part for trips and things she enjoys. She says it's the most satisfying money she's ever received in her life. Christine is saving it for Maya's college. Ironic, considering how all this shit started. Christine and Brian's divorce was finalized about 3 months ago. She got primary custody of Maya. Brian has supervised visits because the judge didn't trust him after learning about the whole financial fraud and infidelity story. Brooke finished her first year of college with excellent grades. She texts me sometimes thanking me and apologizing, though I've told her 1,000 times she has nothing to apologize for. My grandfather Gerald is delighted with how things turned out, says he should have done this years ago. Joyce baked a cake to celebrate Christine's divorce, which was super weird but also very her. My mom finally feels like there was some justice after years of watching Brian get away with everything. As for Brian, he lives alone in that house now, working and paying rent to his own son. He sends me an email every month when he makes the transfer, always with the subject, rent payment, and nothing else. Never additional text, never an attempt at reconciliation, just the cold, commercial transaction he turned all our relationships into being. Sometimes I see him at unavoidable family events, like Maya's birthday, and he acts like nothing happened, like we're a normal family with a normal housing arrangement. It's surreal. Last week, Maya came to visit me and Layla. Christine brought her. The kid is 15 now, and she's incredibly mature for her age, probably because of everything she's had to process. She asked me if I'd ever forgive her dad, and I told her the truth, that I didn't know. That forgiveness is complicated when someone has hurt you so much for so long. She thought about it and then said, "That's okay. I don't know if I'll forgive him either." And there it is, the 3rd generation affected by Brian's selfish decisions. Layla and I are doing well, very well actually. She says all this family drama prepared her for anything life throws at us, that after surviving my racist and manipulative father, everything else is easy. We're thinking about buying our own house soon, something that's really ours, without all the heavy history that the house where my father lives has. Ironic that I own a property but live renting my own apartment, but that's how things are. Sometimes I think about how everything would have been if my father had simply been honest, if he'd been a decent father who kept his promises. But then I realize I probably never would have really gotten to know Christine and Brooke without all this mess. And they've become real family to me in ways my father never was. So I guess something good came out of all this, even though the road to get here was complete shit.